Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Amanda, and I'm coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And my friend Erin is on the other side of the camera, who will be controlling all the things that you'll be seeing on the screen behind me. But we invite you to participate along with us this morning as we explore the world of fish. If you have a question or comment that you would like to share during our program, we ask that you text us on those questions to 562-286-1838, and we will be happy to answer those questions live during our program today. And if you have a question and you're watching this at a later time, and it's not during our live program, you're welcome to still email us any questions that you have as we explore together at live@lbaop.org, and one of our educators will get back to you. So whatever time you're watching this, we welcome you to participate and get your questions answered as we explore. Okay, so we're going to dive right into our topic today. We are exploring the world of fish. And so obviously behind me, we have a number of fish that are swimming around. This is a view into our tropical reef exhibit. It's our largest exhibit here at the aquarium. And you'll notice there are many different kinds of fish. They look different, they're different sizes, but what is it that makes a fish a fish? Well, we're going to explore that together. We're going to look at a picture of a particular fish, and we're going to look for, what are those common characteristics? What do you see on this fish? I'll get out of the way because I'm blocking it. What are some things that you notice about this fish that might tell you that it's a fish? How do you know? How do you know that this animal is not a squirrel or, I don't know, a snake? What would be some things that would be different? So go ahead and text us any comments or observations you have to 562-286-1838. And I also realize that there are some teachers who have their classes watching, and you are welcome to collect those questions from your classes and text them into us as well. But how do you know that this is a fish? What things do you notice about it? What kinds of things stand out to you if you were just looking at this that you would say, I noticed this? Well, one thing I notice right away is the color. Now, it's a pretty bright orange. Now, is that true of all fish? Are all fish bright orange? Well, no, of course not. But it is something that I notice about this fish is orange. But that doesn't really make it a fish, because not everything that's orange is a fish, of course. But what are some other things that you notice about this fish's body? What do you think it uses to move? And what other things are there? Now, I realize there's also a delay in what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and responding. But as we wait for some observations, I'm going to point out that not everything is always the same color on this fish. We were talking about the orange color, but do you see something that's not orange? I think the lips kind of stand out to me. They might look a little light orange, but also a little bit of yellowish color to them. I think they have kind of an interesting mouth here. Also, the eye, I notice, is not orange. It kind of stands out to me. It's got these little eyes. But those don't really make a fish a fish. What do you see covering the outside of the fish's body? So if you were to look at this, I don't know if you've ever touched a fish before. You may not have touched one. I wonder what it would feel like if you were to touch one. And what do they have? Would it feel spiky? Would it feel soft and squishy? What do they have on the outside of their body that protects them? Because that is a very important fish characteristic. You might see them if you look really carefully. What are all of these things right here? Well, if you're thinking it to yourself, you could be shouting it out to the computer. Those are scales. So fish bodies are covered in scales. That's a very important coating and protective protection for them. So they have scales covering their body, and you can see them pretty well in this picture. So you can see these little tiny lines, those little designs are scales on their body. But how this fish moves through the water is also really important. What do they have to help them move? Did you notice these same things that I'm noticing? They've got fins. Now, where do you see fins on the fish's body? Because you may have thought, oh, well, I know where their fins are. They have a fin for their tail. Their tail's a fin. So, of course, this fin has a special name. It's called a caudal fin. So the tail fin or the caudal fin that they use moving back and forth to help sometimes push it through the water to help them swim. That's the caudal fin. But where else do these fish have fins? What other parts of their bodies have fins? Well, you may have noticed right here on the side, fish have fins right on the side called pectoral fins. So it's kind of like our hands in a way. If you were to put your elbows close to your body and kind of move your hands back and forth like that, it's kind of like if you wanted to move like a fish with their pectoral fins moving. It'd be like that in a way. But they have other fins besides just their pectoral fins. These might help them to steer a little bit, depending on the fish. They also have fins other places. Where else do you see fins? So we see one fin here on this side, one fin on the other side. We see their tail fin. Do you notice this fin right here? This fin that's on their back also has a special name. It's called a dorsal fin. Now that might sound familiar to you. Maybe you've heard that term before. Maybe you haven't. But if you wonder about what the word dorsal means, just take your hand and pat yourself on the back. I just introduced you to your dorsal side. So dorsal means back. So any animal that has a fin on its back has a dorsal fin. And so fish have dorsal fins on their backs. You can probably think of some other animals that have dorsal fins too. But then they have other fins still. Do you see any evidence of other fins? We might need to actually remove our thing on the bottom here so you can see a little bit better. But we do have a fin here, the dorsal fin. We have a caudal fin. We have the pectoral fins. Oh, but wait a minute. Now I'm seeing another fin. It's almost like it's paired with the dorsal fin. So just like they have a fin on their back, they also have a fin down here. This is their anal fin. And then, wait a minute, there's some more fins down here. Did you notice those? They were hard to see at first, but now that we look again, we can see that there are two more fins. So we have the paired fins, the pectoral fins on the side, but then they also have these paired fins down here. These are called pelvic fins. I wonder why the fish have those there. I wonder what they might be used for. Well, maybe we can make some comparisons, and we can look at another picture of a fish. So let's look at another picture of a fish. We know that fish have scales. We know that they have fins. But then, what about this one? This is a different kind of fish. And do you see the scales on its body? I see them right here. Do you see fins on its body? I see one pectoral fin on this side. The other one would be on the other side. Do you see a dorsal fin? Yeah, right back here. And the anal fin? Also right here. The caudal fin. The tail fin. Yep, they have a tail fin. The caudal fin. And then do you see the pelvic fins anywhere? Right below, right down here. The pelvic fins always seem to be right below the fish on the bottom. That's really interesting. I wonder why they use those pelvic fins. Oh, actually, we have pelvic bones in our body too. They're attached to, well, our legs. Our legs reach down and they help us to move, don't they? They help us to walk around. And they're attached to, like, our pelvic bone is where those meet the rest of the body. So I wonder if pelvic fins, still going to think about that a little bit more. But let's look at what other characteristics you see of this fish. We know that fish have scales. We know that they have fins. But this animal lives in the water. How does it survive in the water? It uses the fins to help it move and swim. But how does it breathe? Do you know what a fish uses to breathe? What is it? Because do they have lungs like we do to help us breathe the air? I didn't get any water, did you? But fish don't have lungs. What is it that fish have that they can use to breathe so that they don't have to keep coming up to the surface to breathe air? They can stay underwater as long as they want. In fact, they probably want to stay underwater all the time because they're actually breathing the water. But they don't use lungs to breathe the water. They use, are you saying it? Gills. So they use gills. Do you know where the gills are on a fish? Well, if you look right here on this fish, this is called a California sheephead. It's kind of a funny name. But see this dark head that it has, like this black head, and then it starts to turn into this other pinkish sort of color behind it? Well, right at the border of this black head is this funny little line, And that represents the gill covering. We call it an operculum on a fish. It's kind of a funny word. Do you want to say that together with me? Operculum. Operculum is the covering that goes over the gills of the fish. The gills are actually on the inside of the fish where we can't see them very well. But that's where they get oxygen out of the water to help them breathe. So the water might go in through their mouth and then it comes out over their gills. It comes out of their operculum and it's right here. Now, if we were to go back to the Garibaldi, do you think you'd be able to find the gills on the Garibaldi or the operculum, the covering that goes over them? Let's take a look at our Garibaldi again and see if we can find where the gills would be on the Garibaldi. Of course, I need to get out of the way. Can you see where there's a little bit of a line? It kind of looks like the letter C. So again, right here, this is the edge of the operculum, that crazy sounding word, the operculum that they use for breathing underwater. So, fish have scales, they have fins, they have gills that help them to breathe as well. So, now we know some of the basic parts of a fish, but when we were looking at that sheephead and the Garibaldi, did you notice anything else that was different? We noticed their color was different, but what about the shapes of their fins? Did you happen to notice that? Let's look. How would you describe? Let's look at the dorsal fin first. It looks like it almost has this long sort of leading edge of the dorsal fin, almost like this really fancy haircut that then just kind of whips back into this very pointed dorsal fin back here. So the dorsal fin is kind of far back on its body, a little short along the top, and then it kind of gets pointed at the end, kind of points backwards. But then look at the shape of the tail fin of the Garibaldi. How would you describe this shape? I'm thinking of a favorite holiday of mine that's in February, and I'm thinking of Valentine's Day. What kind of shape comes to your mind when you think of Valentine's Day or when you think of love? I think of a heart. Do you see a heart in the shape of the Garibaldi's tail? I see one. I see a sideways heart. So that's kind of a neat thing to notice. Now, if you look at the pectoral fins on the side, they're very kind of flowy. You can kind of see these rays coming out, which indicate that they can actually kind of move those fins like this. They're not stiff fins like this. They're ray-finned fish, and so it's like they have all these little extensions or rays inside their fins to help them be kind of flexible. And kind of like if you were moving your fingers like this. That's how a fish can use their fins as they swim. And of course, the solid color, this all orange color of this fish we're noticing. Let's go back to that sheephead again and see what other differences we might notice. So our sheephead isn't just all one color, is it? It has three colors that I notice. Do you see the black head? Kind of a pink middle part of its body, a black backside and tail, also a white chin here too. So this is a different picture of a sheephead that's in a kelp forest. So here's the kelp and here's the rock. So it's kind of hanging out at the bottom where the holdfast of the kelp is, holding onto that rock. But now let's look at the fins. Even the shape of this fish. This one looks a little bit more like a rectangle, doesn't it? The Garibaldi was a little bit more rounded or more like an oval. This one kind of has a funny squared off rectangular shape to it. But look at the dorsal fin. It does still have kind of that pointed part that goes back like a little triangle that points in the back, but it's black, different color. And then it's got the anal fin here, almost the same size and shape, just on the underside. The pectoral fins, oh look, they're the lighter color. They're kind of rounded, it looks like. And I don't really see the pelvic fins on this one. It must be folded up. Did you know that fish can hide their fins when they want to? They can have their fins be wide out and open, or they can fold them down up against their body where you might not even notice them at all. So it's kind of interesting. We'll have to look for the pelvic fins on some other fish. Now maybe we can bring up another picture. We've looked at our two fish, the Garibaldi and the sheephead. Let's look at another picture and see what we discover about it. No. Okay, let's see what we have. Oh, wait a minute. Is this a fish? Well, maybe we should ask ourselves some questions. Does it have fins? Oh, do you notice fins on the fish? Yeah, I actually noticed it has a dorsal fin. Sure, this has a dorsal fin. And it looks like these right here, are these fins or flippers maybe? But okay, yeah, it does kind of look like they have some kind of fishy sort of thing. Well, let's see, what about scales? Do we have any scales on this fish? No, I don't really notice any scales. Do you see any scales? No scales. This one is quite large. It has no scales. Well, okay, how about the gills? Do we see any gills on this animal? Let's see, they'd be right around here somewhere. Oh, wait a minute. I don't see any gills. And pelvic fins? Do we see any pelvic fins or an anal fin? Oh, no, I don't see an anal fin on this either. So maybe this isn't a fish. Have you found any gills on it yet? Or do you know what this animal is already? If you know what it is, you can shout it out. I think I may have heard some of you say that it's a whale. So is a whale a fish? No. And one of the important reasons why they're not a fish is that they don't have gills. They use something else on the top of their head to help them breathe the air. So every time a whale wants to breathe, it can't just breathe underwater like fish can. They actually have to come to the surface, let out all the air in their lungs, and then get another deep breath of air to help them survive and breathe. And it goes into their lungs. So they have lungs just like we do. So very different than fish. So they both still live underwater, and they both have fins, but the rest of them is a little bit different. They don't have scales, they don't have gills, and they're very different. Now, we also have some questions that are coming in. So I'm going to go ahead, step off for a second, and take a look at these questions. Miss Dominguez's class wants to know about how they escape predators. How do fish escape predators? And how long do they live? And how many fish species are there? Oh my goodness, so many questions. Well, let's first look at how they escape. So let's go back to a fish. We're going to ignore this whale because a whale is a mammal. It breathes air. It gives live birth. It has, it's a warm-blooded animal. It has a lot of differences. It doesn't have scales. Even at some point in life, it has hair. But it's not a fish, so we're going to ignore the whale. We're going to look back again at fish. So how would this animal escape predators? That's a really good question. I'm glad they asked. Because if a predator was coming after you, you would probably want to, well, what would you do? If you were trying to hide from something, I guess that's one way. You could hide from it. If you wanted to stay safe, you could either hide or else you could run away. Those would be two really good things to do. So how would this fish be able to hide? Or how would it be able to get away? Let's look at that. Well, this fish looks really different, but let's go back to some of those basic things we were talking about before. Do they have scales? I see the scales. So they have scales covering their body. Do they have gills or an operculum covering? Do you see that line right there? So yeah, that's evidence that they've got gills too. Do they have fins? Oh, do they have fins? Where do you see fins? Well, look up here. It looks like it's all just part of one big whole body, but this right here is a dorsal fin. So they have dorsal fins too, and see how it's kind of pointing back? Kind of a little bit of a triangle shape. And it has an anal fin down here too. And it has, believe it or not, some little folded pectoral fins down here at the bottom, and a tail fin. So do you think that tail fin and those, the pectoral fins, the ones on the side, do you see those? I really am having a hard time seeing them. But if you were to look really, really carefully at this actual fish, you would notice that they do actually have fins right here. But they're see-through. It's really hard to see them. In fact, maybe I should show you over here on my, well, it might not be the best example, but on my document camera, I have a picture, or I have a model of a fish. And this model is not of the outside of a fish, but rather it is a model. Here, let me try just bringing it over here. This might work better. Can you see my fish? I'll hold it in front of me. So I took off the outside. Well, I didn't. Somebody else did. So you can't see the scales, but you can see what's below it. And it's actually, let's see if you can see this. It is a skeleton. So this is a skeleton of a fish, and you can see its bones, but do you look at the top where the dorsal fin is? Do you see how there's like these little rays that kind of stick out? Or maybe even the anal fin down here. Do you see how there's kind of these rays that stick out there? But this is what we call a bony fish because they have bones in them. And even their rays, it might look kind of hard to see here, look like they're invisible, but they do actually have little fins that are right there. And so they can use their caudal fin. This one would use its caudal fin to quickly move away from predators and to outswim them as best as it can. But there's also something else that's really helpful for this animal in blending in. You might think, well, it doesn't look like it's blending in at all. It's very brightly colored. Did you notice the different colors that they have? So, and also Mrs. Ramirez's class observed that the shapes of the three fish mouths could maybe predict what it is due to their diet. Ooh, very interesting observation, because you're right. All of these fish had different shaped mouths. Look at the mouth on this fish. It's very long and pointy. That could be really good for reaching into small cracks and crevices and small spaces like in the coral reefs where these animals live. Now, coral reefs, their habitat, their home where they live, are bright and colorful. And so actually having these bright colors, hopefully you notice them too, that bright yellow color and the stripes, the black, the white, those can help them to camouflage in that bright coral reef. And that long mouth can help them reach in and grab food in those small spaces between the coral reefs. So you're right, they're going to eat small things with those small mouths, whereas a larger fish with a larger mouth might be able to eat some larger things. But also, do you see this big black spot right here? This big black spot, we call this a false eye spot because it looks like it could almost be a big eye. If you didn't know any better, you might look at this fish and think that was the head because it looks like, oh, that's the eye. Maybe this is the mouth right here. It's a big mouth opening up like this. Do you see it? You have to use your imagination a little bit. But animals will sometimes use that false eye spot to protect themselves and hide from predators. So that, or maybe not hide, but if a predator sees them, they might be confused and think that that is the head with a big eye looking at them and might be a little intimidated by it. And so a false eye spot is another way that they can protect themselves from predators. So how do they escape? They can swim fast using their fins, and they can also camouflage and blend in so that they're not seen. Someone asked, or they also asked, how long do they live? Well, that can all vary based on the fish. Some fish, like our giant sea bass, for example, I think we have a picture of one of those, they could actually live, more than 50 years. They can live a really long time, maybe 70 years. Some people think, well, maybe even longer than 80 years. Who knows? But this fish is a very big fish, and it can live a really long time. So this fish can also be about 500 pounds. If we were to let it grow to its full size, its full potential, they can weigh up to 500 pounds. But look, do you see its gill covering there? Its operculum. Do you notice that, wow, it has a dorsal fin too. There's a little bit of one that you can kind of see pointed back, but most of it is kind of folded down against its body. It does still have an anal fin here, and it also has some pectoral fins on the side, and then pelvic fins on the bottom. But that is a giant sea bass, and they can live a long time. Some fish, they might not make it very long. They might only live maybe a few years. How many fish species are there? That's a great question. There are about 34,000 different fish species in the world. That's a lot. 34,000 fish species, but that's a lot of fish. And then, do all fish lay the same number of eggs? That's what Mrs. Ramirez was asking. So thank you for that question. And the answer is no. Some fish might only lay, maybe a few thousand eggs. Some could lay over 1 million eggs. I don't remember what the exact number is of our mola mola, but I think we have a picture of one of those too. And they can lay over 1 million eggs. So they can, here's a mola mola, also known as an ocean sunfish. Have you seen this animal before? Well, let's real quickly look at its body, because this is a very special fish because it is the largest of all the bony fish. So even bigger than that giant sea bass, remember I said it could get up to 500 pounds, the mola mola can get even larger than that.
300 million.
300 million eggs is how many eggs the mola mola lays. Not 300,000, 300 million eggs. So that's a lot of eggs. And this also is a pretty big fish. It's the largest of all the bony fish. Now, the largest of all fish is the whale shark, but that's a different, we're not going to talk about that one right now. We're looking at our bony fish, the ones that have bones in them. And where do you see its fins? Do you see fins on its body? Well, I definitely see a dorsal fin on its back right up here, and I see the anal fin down here. And, well, it's really hard to see any sort of pectoral fin on this guy, but look at this. This is weird. This does not look like the other fins that we saw that were caudal fins on the other fish, but this, believe it or not, is a caudal fin. It looks really different, doesn't it? Its shape is very different. And so that must mean that if these shapes of their fins are different, do you think the way they move through the water is different? It must be, because they're going to look really silly if they try to move, waving that back and forth to propel themselves through the water. In fact, these fins seem so much larger. I wonder if they use these at all. Are you wondering that same question? Well, they do. They actually use their dorsal fin and their anal fin, and they kind of flop them back and forth like this to help them move through the water. So they don't rely on their tail fin, because their tail fin, their caudal fin here, that little thing is not going to push this big body through the water very quickly. These are not the fastest swimming fish, but they do have these fins on the top and the bottom, the dorsal and anal fin, that they will use to flap back and forth to go through the water. Isn't that interesting? Fish fins can all be very different and can be used in a different way. Oh, Mrs. Ramirez had another great question. Is a seahorse a fish? Well, let's take a look at a seahorse and let's see if we can figure it out. Because we want to know, do they have fins? Do they have scales? Do they have gills? Those would be some important things to look for. Well, let's see. Seahorses tend to be pretty small, so it can be hard to get some really good pictures of them. So we'll see what we have that will be maybe the most obvious that we can look for these observations. And as we're looking for those pictures, Ms. Dominguez's class said, how do we know if they're poisonous and how fast is the fastest fish? Oh, those are good questions. Okay, so we have a seahorse. Okay, we'll get to those questions in just a second after we look at our seahorse. So look at the shape of the seahorse. It's really an unusual but beautiful shape. It does kind of have a head like a fish, and it has a little teeny tiny mouth on the end of it. Kind of looks like that yellow and white fish that we saw earlier. But let's see. Do they have fins? Whoa, it's really hard to see, but they do have a dorsal fin. They have a dorsal fin right here. And it's also really hard to see, but they do have pectoral fins too. So those fins on the side of the fish that we said if you put your elbows next to your body and moved your hands like that, it would be like their pectoral fins. Well, on a seahorse, it'd be more like having your fins right by your cheek. And so right behind their cheeks, right up here is where they're going to have these little tiny pectoral fins. But if these fins aren't very big, they also, sometimes you can see a little tiny anal fin right down here. So they do have fins, but they're just not very obvious. They're really hard to see. And if you ever get a chance to look at a seahorse at an aquarium, look really carefully at it. Look really closely and see if you can find the fins that they use to move, because they're not so obvious. But they do have fins. And believe it or not, they even have gills. So seahorses use gills to breathe. So just like the other fish we were looking at, the seahorse is a fish. Now their scales are a little bit different. They don't have the regular scales that we've looked at on the other fish. But they do have these really cool rings around them, these kind of bony rings and like a plate of armor to protect their bodies, which is important because they don't want to be eaten by predators. They can't get away from predators very fast because they don't have those big, strong fins that the other fish that we were looking at did. Oh, here's a great picture. You can see the dorsal fin on this seahorse. Do you see it now? Yeah, this one's a little bit more obvious. But they just have these little tiny fins there and there to help them move. So believe it or not, the seahorse is the slowest swimming fish in the ocean. So you were asking about the fastest swimming ones. Well, the seahorse is the slowest swimming ones because, you know, those fins aren't very big. They don't help them move very quickly. Instead, they use that beautiful curly tail that they can use to hold on to things. So they can unroll that tail and then they can roll it back up to hold on. It's called a prehensile tail. So they can use it to grab onto things, and that can help them to camouflage and hide in places where a predator might not see them. And then the fastest fish, getting back to that question from Miss Dominguez's class, it is the sailfish, and it can swim up to 68 miles per hour. The sailfish is a big fish, a long, skinny body, or a long, not super skinny, fusiform shaped body, but it also has this fin. Its dorsal fin is huge. It's enormous. But they don't use that dorsal fin flapping it back and forth to move. They use their caudal fin, their tail fin, to move. But that, because they swim so fast, that really tall dorsal fin on their back helps them to stabilize so that they're not like falling over and spinning in circles as they're swimming so quickly through the water. And one last question before we go, because we need to wrap up our time together. Someone asked, where do fish lay eggs? Well, that's a good question. It can depend on that type of fish. Some fish will find a nice little, they'll make a little nest, not like a bird nest, but they'll find a nice little place. They'll kind of hollow it out, use some water, use some other items to kind of place a nice sort of protective area. A lot of times they'll find an empty shell or an empty, just an empty space where they can deposit their eggs, and then many times the parents will guard those eggs. Sometimes they don't find a place for their eggs at all. They just release them out into the water and they just say, okay, I hope you're good. I hope you do okay and you find some other fish and you grow up and live a good, happy life. But most fish don't care for their babies. So they allow their babies to kind of hatch on their own and fend for themselves as soon as they're born, which makes me very grateful that I am not a fish. But fish are fascinating creatures. They have such interesting ways of living in life underwater that I think would be kind of fun to be able to do. But of course, if I want to explore the water, I have to put on scuba gear so I can breathe underwater, because I have to breathe air and not the water. I don't have gills like fish. But fish are beautifully adapted, and they have a great design for living in this ocean habitat. And we've had a chance to explore some of those and also note some of those differences between these adaptations that fish have, looking at how they use their fins, the different shapes of their fins, and just looking for other color differences and size differences. We didn't really talk about size very much, but there's a wide variety of sizes in fish. It can go from little to as big as that mola mola, or even the whale shark, which is a type of fish. So yes, sharks are fish too. Okay, well, we need to get going, but I hope you've had a fun time exploring with us together. And again, if you have further questions that come to your mind after this program's over, you can email us at live@lbaop.org. We would love to hear from you. And teachers, if you're out there and you would like to respond to us and let us know how many kids you had watching today, we would really appreciate that feedback. So you can just text it to that line as well, and we can know how many we're reaching. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great day. Bye.